Hello, I am Jacob Unterreiner, and I am here with
Paula Tesoriero,
Jacob Adler,
and we are 3/8 of the Openscore Ensemble that will be performing some pieces by Philip Glass at the Crescent Ballroom on December 19th. A shout out to our members who are not here: Megan Neff, who's playing violin; Sarah Smith, our soprano; Josh Bennett on clarinet; Jesse Damari on clarinet; and Alona Adler on keys and voice as well. Let's get into it. We'll talk some minimalism, talk some musical philosophy, and should be a great time.
A great time.
Awesome.
So, first off, Jacob, I have a question for you. What exactly is, in your mind, the Openscore Ensemble? Because there's been many variations of it. It seems like your brainchild. I kind of am under the assumption that any ensemble you put together to play some kind of out there music is the Openscore Ensemble. But do you view it differently than that?
Yeah, no, it is a collective of musicians that has evolved over the years. It's been at least 10 years. It started as an improvisation ensemble at Paradise Valley Community College. And after a few semesters of that, I had an idea to do some arrangements of some classical music and some early minimalism. So the improvisation ensemble became more, let's say, performing notated works, but making arrangements of those pieces, hence Openscore. So finding pieces that can be adapted to the instruments at hand. And early Philip Glass, early minimalism lends itself really well. The original instrumentation is amazing, with the saxophones and the electric organs and the voices, but I think it also works really well for other instrumentation as well. I think there's a lot of music, like music of J.S. Bach, for example, like works amazingly for any instrument group. And then, some pieces are very idiomatic for specific groups. So we try to choose pieces that can be freely arranged. And over the years, we've done piano etudes by Giorgi Ligeti. We've done Julius Eastman pieces for multiple pianos. We've done Steve Reich's music. We did 6 marimbas. Yeah, we did a lot of Olivier Messiaen. We did Arvo Pärt. We did a lot of compositions written by group members. And improvisations as well. So it over the years, it's been a collective of an evolving constellation of local musicians. And I've always been very lucky and felt very grateful to have worked with very, very nice and talented, open-minded musicians. And it's always been, a pleasure to collaborate with all of them.
For Paula.
Yes.
You're kind of the one who booked this show. You're kind of the brainchild behind wanting to perform Philip Glass at Crescent Ballroom. And when we're out talking to people about it, you're very quick to be like, I'm so excited to see this music in this space. And so I'm just curious about what you find to be so significant about that.
That's a good question. I have seen performances at places like Valley Bar or Crescent, which are more generally contemporary music venues, so rock, pop. I mean, they cover a lot of ground in those genres for sure. But I just remember going to this one show and there was a bassoon player playing with them, and this guy next to me was trying to, impress his date and was like, do you know what instrument that is? And she was like, no. And he's like, it's a bassoon. And I just remember thinking I was like, wow, people just don't know much about other instruments and other arrangement or other types of music. Not to say that their knowledge of music isn't vast, but it just felt like there's always something that you don't know. And so I suppose when I think about, when I think back to when we played Music with Changing Parts at the Lost Leaf, I remember feeling connected to the audience, and there were people there who did not know what they were signing up for when they walked into that.
They were just there to grab a
venue.
beer.
Exactly. And they all stuck around, and they all seemed spiritually with us. And so I remember that night thinking, what if we expanded like this venue and like took it to a place where, again, like people have a different expectation of what they're going to hear when they walk into a place. And Crescent Ballroom seemed like the ideal size, the ideal like staff. I mean, they're very friendly there, and obviously know some of the owner. And it was nice because I emailed him, I think after, like the day after the Lost Leaf performance, and I was like, can we do this? And he said yes. And then just due to scheduling,
10 years elapsed.
10 years after. Yeah. But yeah, due to scheduling conflicts, we couldn't make it work. So, yeah, I think, like I said, I think there's an expectation to music performed in a venue versus an art museum versus Tempe Center for the Arts, and things like that. So I like the idea of marrying the two energies and kind of dispelling an expectation and bringing something that I think is not very known into like potentially a more like getting more people to know about it, or getting more people to be exposed to it, and maybe they hate it, but maybe they love it, and maybe it ignites curiosity.
Got it. And do you remember, Paula, like the first time you heard Philip Glass's music, or Steve Reich, like the first time you really like consciously engaged with minimalism?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, it was in Music Theory 4 with Jacob Adler here to my right, because he was my teacher then. And I remember listening to it and just being like, wow, the rhythmic element, it was 6 marimbas, I think was the first piece. And there was something about, like, it's such a lulling piece in a certain way, and I had just never heard anything so, like the timbre of 6 marimbas happening at the same time and playing these rhythms. It was like a very simple and yet profound thing to listen to, especially coming from like, a background of classical music. And then I think I just put pressure on myself at the time to be like, I have to be so interesting and I have to get out of like the 4-chord progression and things like that. And then hearing that just gave me a little bit of freedom and just found it genuinely interesting. And then I ended up doing an assignment where I had to, you assigned us, we had to analyze a piece of music and then create our own piece based off of the song we were analyzing. So I chose 6 marimbas, analyzed that, and then wrote my own little minimalist piece, and it was just so much fun. So much fun to think about, like, how can I use textures and rhythm in this way that doesn't change, like, too much, but creates this really cool, like, almost... yeah, it's not meant to be ingested in like a short-term type of way. It's something that you want to be patient with, and in a world that feels like it's continuously getting a little faster, I think I also just found the patience of that music to be really calming.
Do you remember your first time, Jacob, like encountering minimalism and what you thought of it or what you felt when you were listening?
I do. I think I was 17 around there, and I went to my friend's house, and he just turned on Dance 2 from Einstein on the Beach, and he just blasted it on his phonograph, and I was like, "Oh, what is this? This is insane. I've never heard anything like this." Re mi, la re, and it's just like so many instruments, so fast, so weird. It's just the weirdest thing I'd ever heard. And then right after that, he put on "Love Supreme" by John Coltrane, which I also hadn't heard. So
what a 1-2 punch!
Yeah.
Who was the 17? What was his name?
Oh, William Moore.
Shout out.
So he was composing at the time, and a few of us in high school had a common interest in the music of Alexander Scriabin, among others, but also like Steve Reich, Philip Glass, and more weird contemporary 20th century music. But yeah, Scriabin was like the core for me. That's what kind of got me into music, like in a really serious way, which is a totally different style, late 19th, early 20th century Russian late romantic mystical piano music was very different from Einstein on the Beach, but it all was kind of swirling around, at the time, creating a, energy and inspiration to explore, to try to experience as much new music as possible. If something like this is out there, like what else could be out there? So that was a very memorable early experience of minimalism.
Wow, that is such an impressive back-to-back 17-year-old to just be like, here's Dance 2, here's a Low Supreme. Yeah. That's really cool. That was not what my friends were showing me. I was telling a story earlier this week actually about a time I heard a genre of music for the first time that was instantly memorable, and it reminds me of what you were saying about hearing Dance 2 for the first time. I had a friend when I was like 14 or 15, and his parents had just gotten divorced. And we were helping his dad move into his new house. And so it was a very somber energy, like parents are getting divorced, we're moving you into this new home. It's like kind of empty and sad. And we're just pulling boxes in. And towards the end of the night, we had a bunch of stuff moved in, but we hadn't gotten like certain pieces of furniture. So we were just sitting on lawn chairs in the living room, surrounded by boxes, playing a video game, Skate 2, which is like a skateboarding video game. And my friend goes, hey, check out this song I just heard. And he put on dubstep. It was like an Excision song, I think, or maybe like Datsik or something, like early dubstep in like 2010. And like, I was just like, this is the craziest sounding thing. And in such a surreal environment where it already felt like we were kind of in limbo. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I'll never forget that moment. And I had a similar feeling, not that I was a big fan of dubstep in it. Like we're not doing dubstep at Crescent Ballroom, but like I had a similar feeling of like, wow, like I never thought that something could sound like this. And so it just opened up this like idea of like, wow, there's a lot of room to be surprised in music, which is really cool.
Absolutely.
I have a question for you as well, Jacob, which is you seem to have a really strong relationship with like Herculean musical tasks, right? So you've done the full Einstein on the Beach, which is like 4.5 hours of music, very, very fast, very, very challenging from an endurance perspective.
For sure.
You recently performed Gulistan by Sarabji, which is a very, very technical piece that you spent years practicing and working on. You were even talking the other day about how you went to see Lamont Young perform in a loft for 5 hours. So
not that long. It was like an hour and a half or something. But it was something like that.
But why? What attracts you about something that's that hard and that long and that much of like sort of an endurance challenge as a musician?
I don't know. I don't think it's because of the endurance. I don't think that in itself is the reason why. I guess it's just some of the music that fascinates me requires a lot of endurance. With Einstein on the Beach, I don't think I've ever listened to the whole thing straight through, like from start to finish, except for the time when we performed it. But that's like, in a way, sometimes that music is more fun to perform than to listen to, in a way. I don't know. Sometimes it's like that with minimal music. You got to be in the right mood, sometimes. And not everyone's, ready for a steaming hot lasagna when they wake up in the morning. It's a lot like food. You gotta be in the mood for it. Right? You know what I'm talking about. So I don't think it's because of the endurance. It just happens to. I think just some of the music I'm interested in happens to. Require a lot of endurance. I think another piece that required a lot of physical endurance that I performed a few times was strumming music by Charlemagne Palestine. He's a living composer in New York who performed this piece, which is kind of like a structured improvisation on a piano, or sometimes performed on two pianos by one person, which is constant tremolos for over an hour. But because, piano's heavy and you got to play these big 10-note chords for a very long time at a very loud a loud and fast pace, it definitely required some physical preparation to be able to survive that long without injuring oneself or getting too tired too early. But that was another piece. With Gulistan, that was just a piece that I just fell in love with over 20 years ago and listened to it for at least 10 years while falling asleep, and kind of became intertwined with, that sensation of, slipping into a dream state. And so that music is, I kind of trained myself to have those associations inadvertently. And I just loved that piece so much that I just started practicing it when COVID hit. And I figured, well, I'm going to be at home for a while, so I'll just start practicing it. And, whatever, no pressure. Just see what happens. And it took me 3 years to learn it, and to perform it and to record it. But, I had some injuries and some breaks, in the middle. So that kind of slowed me down a little bit. But yeah, it took that kind of dedication. I don't know. I like that kind of long-term planning. I'm going to be working on this for a while. I don't need to think about anything else.
Interesting. Do you feel badass? As a musician when you play them? Because
I don't know.
It's so interesting because when we left, because we went and saw you perform Gulistan, and it was a beautiful performance, and the dream state that you're talking about was definitely something that I felt as well, this very surreal sort of half asleep, half awake thing. I think Jordan actually fell asleep during part of it, which was
that's ideal.
Yeah. And as we were leaving, or maybe it was the next day, we were talking about I'm just imagining I feel a little badass for having been able to see it, because I was I'm imagining encountering a musician who's all and this is what I do in my ego brain of having hypothetical conversations with hoity-toity pretentious musicians, and he's like, well, have you ever heard of Sarabji? He makes these, and I'm like, yeah, no, I've seen that live actually. I've seen someone perform that, and so I think of that, and I'm curious because you seem so. Obviously, you're very connected with music, and you have a lot of passion, and you commit to these incredibly disciplined performances. But after they're finished, you kind of just seem yeah. And that's such, I'd be after I finish some things, I'm just I'm talking my shit. I'm feeling a lot of bravado, and I'm just curious about if you ever have if there's any of that athletic sort of competitive thing in you at all, because it's interesting to perform such difficult music without any of that. I don't. I'm curious of how I don't know how I would do that.
Does that mean that after you perform on the 19th, you're gonna be
Yeah, I mean subtly in my ways, yes, for sure.
I don't know. I think I just kind of hop from project to project. Once I've finished something, I just I'm kind of done with it, and I kind of forget about it quickly, and I want to move to the next thing. I mean, with this Gulistan, that was a very special and personal project that I really was intending to make a really high quality recording. Something that I thought that I would be proud of and would enjoy listening to. And that was what I set out to do. And then when I was done, I was just ready for the next thing, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. It's just if anything, it creates kind of a really strong personal associations and leaves its mark on memories throughout my life. So for example, having listened to that piece for over 20 years, I have many very, very specific associations throughout my life with that music, driving at 3 a.m. down the freeway, listening to that, and a lot of different experiences. But then over the years, while practicing it, I also embedded many memories and experiences that were intertwined, that were happening at the time. So even if I look at a certain page in the score, or kind of going back to a measure or a certain page, it'll remind me of what I was ruminating about while I was practicing it. And it's not always positive stuff, sometimes just negative things, oh man, I have this associated with this page, which isn't, it's unintentional. But the thing is, it's just really interesting to observe how spending time with that piece has intertwined itself with memory throughout my life. And so it's just a very personal experience. Like I know it's a very particular dish of music, and
It's
I
a
can't
hot lasagna.
It's lasagna with a lot of opium like baked into it. I guess. I don't know something, but I can't expect. I don't have any expectations that other people have the same experiences. I have very specific personal experiences that only I can experience. You know, that only I can know, and other people will have their own associations. So I don't know. I look at it more like a personal journey, I guess, for lack of a better word, and something that kind of intertwines itself with memory while experiencing the music in one way or another.
Yeah, I'm so curious to collaborate more with you and get to know more about like your specific relationship with the type of dedication that it takes, because I understand my own very well, and I have a pretty good handle on like the motivation of other musicians that I know who also engage in just really difficult or really technical things. So I'm just curious, always curious about that. Because one of the things I think of when I see performances like that, like there's been times where I've seen shows that feel very singular, and some of them have been classical and some of them have been like punk. Like I remember going to like a warehouse show in LA one time with seeing this punk band, and like lights were like ratchet strapped to like columns. Like it was the most DIY thing ever. And I remember leaving that show and being like, I think that was the most punk thing that happened on planet Earth today. And I think I was there for it. Like it felt singular in that way. And that's kind of how I felt leaving the Gulistan performance, where it was like, that was the most like technical piece of music that may have been performed on planet Earth today. I mean, obviously I have no way of checking that, but like that's kind of what it felt like. And like I was there, which I think is what we're also bringing to the table with our show on the 19th. Like this idea of like, this will be like the most singular experience you could have on a night, on a day, on this planet, I think.
Yeah, I think it can leave an indelible mark on people and make really strong associations if people happen to be, like receptive to it and open to it.
Yeah, of course.
If you have a crowd of 100 people, maybe, if you can reach out just to if a few people have really experiences like the one you just described, and it creates a really strong memory and association for them throughout their life, so that they remember that time that they heard Philip Glass, or any type of experience like that. If only just like one or two people or 10% or whatever experience that's amazing. You can't expect everyone to experience that. Some people will be totally into it and blown away. Some people will be totally bored and distracted, and some people will think it's okay or go in and out of focus. And it's not even the people themselves, but just the people at that moment. I'm not always in the mood for Philip Glass or Sarabji. So, but if you're planning on going to a concert, you're kind of making yourself open to it. But you can't expect to please everybody. And I think music, specifically, early Philip Glass, a little more kind of austere minimalism with a massive amount of repetition, can be extremely irritating to a lot of people, but it can also be very spiritually enlightening to a lot of people at the same time, with different people in the same room having the same experience, but they interpret it in completely opposite ways. And I think I've experienced both of those. I've had very some spiritual experiences, playing that, like when we did The Lost Leaf. That was a very special experience. And, I think that's one thing that's really special about that music. Something about the repetition, which puts you into a different state of mind. It kind of, you're listening to music in a very different way than you listen to other styles of music. It puts you into a trance state, and I don't know, different people have different experiences, but it does have the potential to be what some might say to be spiritually uplifting and deeply meaningful, while at the same time being extremely annoying and irritating to the person next to you. So it's that's what's interesting about that music.
One of the things I see it bringing out in you a little bit, Paula, which like I see this in various forms in your musicianship, because you are so talented and you can kind of like you're such an experienced musician in so many ways, and you're also just somebody who really knows how to like rise to the occasion, even if you have not been the most practiced at something. So like there's almost this sense I have of you sometimes when you're going to rehearsal or we're practicing through a piece together, like you're almost like a basketball player who hasn't practiced and is showing up and just like drops like 50. That's like kind of like what the sense I get of you. And sometimes you're kind of cocky about it in a way that I really find enjoyable. But like, I'm curious about like what your emotional experience is playing this music. And if you ever feel like, oh, I got this, like, I'm curious if you have a similar feeling around that I observe in you, which my observation could be off base. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I think my most emotional experience in this music is the fact that I'm part of a group of people who are dedicating time and energy into making this work. And so I think it's like the practices and it's the performance that like, it's not so much like playing the music by myself doesn't really do a whole lot for me, but to know that like the people around me have worked so hard to make this happen or are just showing up for it. That feels like I wasn't really much one for sports, but that feels like the most team-oriented thing that I've ever done. And it feels like we're all on the same team and we all have the same goal and we are all enjoying ourselves, which is also lovely. So I think, yeah, it's the emotional stuff is like, I look around and I'm like, oh, look at all these people that I get to do this thing with. And we're communicating not just through music, but through the effort that we've put into this music. So that's the most emotional experience that I have with this. And clarify the second half.
The second
of that.
part was like, do you feel like a basketball player who's not going to practice, who's showing up and dropping 50?
Sometimes, which isn't to say that I couldn't practice more, but I think that one thing that I do feel about music in general, which I think is complementary to a personality trait of mine or ability of mine, is like I can go into rehearsal or if need be a performance, and if I'm not quite like the most practiced, I can like what's the word? I can adapt. So I can trust my body and my previous practice and my abilities to be able to adapt to the situation at hand. And I've had to do that, in life many times. And it feels like something that I can count on myself to do musically as well because of, I think, again, like practice, but also just my natural relationship with music. So I think the things that the things that I feel I can kill the most, which are, touch and go, are like showing up to practice. The thing I feel less able to, score at, to keep your athletic metaphor, is leading. So that's a new thing for this one, like trying to do the counting for people and being in more of like a kind of conductor role, or at least like people are looking to me to keep track of things, and that's new. And
now and then we get confused looks like, where are we?
I know.
Was this the third repeat or the 17th repeat?
I don't know. And then I look at you and you look at me. And
shrug shoulders. Yeah. And then someone will just call out, okay, 7th repeat.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. Yeah. No, but that's good. That's helpful. If you have the count with your fingers visually, that can help keep us glued together. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which brings me to like the next question, which I'm curious to get your thoughts on as well, Jacob, which is like, so you're playing with your wife. I'm playing with my partner, which there's probably not a whole lot of quartets of couples playing Philip Glass. That's probably kind of a unique thing. But like, it's so interesting to hear our differences in terms of like, you're like playing it alone doesn't really do much for me. And like practicing alone anything is like one of my favorite parts of music. Like at least recently it has been. It hasn't always been the case, but like sitting down and like really shedding some of these like really intensely fast guitar parts has just been such a satisfying and like rewarding thing. And so in that way we're so different. And I'm curious, like in the way that you and Alona approach music, like what are some of the differences you notice about you're both very, very high level musicians, and like you also seem very different from each other. And I'm curious what those differences like show up as for you guys.
That's kind of hard to say with that music. I don't think there's a lot of differences there. I think we both enjoy it equally. And that was one of the ways I was able to get to know Ilona in Amsterdam. When I moved there in 2006, a good way to meet people is to start an early minimalism ensemble. And, because if you put up some flyers and then the people who respond to it, then you're very likely to have things in common with them. And I met her.
Get off Tinder, guys.
Yeah, and it worked. I met some amazing musicians and open-minded people and friends with who I'm still friends with today. And Ilona and I met in the organ class. So, but I asked her, "Hey, we need another electric organist, keyboardist." So I was able to convince her to join the group, and we performed several times in the Netherlands. And I don't know, we have a very similar fun and interest, in that music. We just enjoy, the ensemble aspect. It's just really fun to be with a group of people. We're all running this marathon together, and we're all counting and playing, and we got to keep up. And it is a very different experience. So this particular type of music, practicing alone versus playing in the ensemble, it's for me, it's I don't know. These days, it's a little less enjoyable to practice this type of music by myself. But once we get together in a group, there's that energy there, and there's that communal connection. And it also helps to keep us on track. If everyone's, I got to play the scale, maybe I didn't practice it enough, but everyone else is playing it. So it just helps me to lock in. But to get back to your original question, I think Ilona and I have a very similar interest in this music.
Did you have a slight crush on Alona when you asked her to join the ensemble? Like, were you kind of like, okay, so it was like,
yes, that was my ploy. That was my strategy. Like, that was the only reason why I started the ensemble. Because what other excuse could I have? She was concertizing as a solo organist, and I said, "Hey, I can pull your stops and turn your pages," and she let me. And I followed her around to all the little Dutch towns, and I'd pull her stops, and So, and then the ensemble's like a little extra reinforcement. So, that was definitely a part of the strategy for sure.
Wow.
Yeah. It wasn't just about music. So.
Yeah. That's really sweet. That's very romantic.
That is very romantic.
And it's a very specific type of romance too.
To be sure.
And that reminds me, the first I think exchange we ever had was about minimalism.
Yeah, because I had just purchased.
What did you buy?
Music for 18 musicians on vinyl.
Yeah.
And I had just come from Stinkweeds.
Yeah.
And that was the night that I met you. So. And
you were very somewhat pretentious in your what do you know about minimalism? Because I asked you because you were like, I just came from Stinkweeds. I was like, oh, what records did you buy? And you were like, I bought this by him. And I was like, oh, and you're like, what do you know about minimalism? And it was like, I loved it. I loved the energy of just a very confident woman who was an expert about something and was willing to I don't know, and not antagonize, but willing to investigate a little bit. What? Come on.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
I gotta vet the men,
Yeah, vet the men with Steve Reich. Which is so interesting. It's interesting that there's a shared sort of minimalist. I don't know.
Romantic glue.
Yeah, minimalism as the romantic glue. Exactly. Are you practicing by yourself for this music? I don't imagine you would be, but I don't know.
You mean just rehearsing the notes?
Yeah. Are you practicing?
I mean, I've played this music so much.
Yeah.
I don't really have to do it that much, but Spaceship has a bunch of like chromatic scale. Not the it has a few things I need to work on for sure. But I think one of the technical challenges is to make sure the whole ensemble stays together and keeps the tempo up.
For sure.
So I can't practice that on my own. Like we have to practice that as a group. But as far as the notes are concerned, no, I don't really. I mean, there's like a couple things I have to work on, make sure I get some transitions. But it's not too bad.
How, Jacob Unterreiner?
Yes.
Have you enjoyed or not enjoyed doing music like this for the very first time in your life? What have you learned from this music also?
I've really enjoyed it very, very deeply. And one of the things that comes to mind is like so much of, it seems like at least a lot of my musical community right now has the last few years really been on this like journey of connecting with your body through music a little bit differently. And I've been having conversations with different friends of mine and you about like, there's certain ways in which when your body is relaxed and gesturing, your playing is just so natural. And that was a really profound, I've been telling everybody about it, but there's this Julian Lage quote, he's a very talented jazz guitar player. And he said that fingers are something that feel, not something that execute. And that was just like a really like mind expanding comment of like, yeah, like I really want to focus on the way that this feels, not on the act of what my fingers are doing. And so this music is that times 10 because I'm really noticing, because of the repetition and the endurance and the technique involved and the speed, I'm really noticing it forces you to really take note of your body after a certain amount of time. Like even today playing, we were practicing music with changing parts, and just like I'm like noticing my hand is squeezing too much and my like toes are curled, and I'm like, okay, I gotta relax to be able to play this like with any sort of fluidity. And like that's a gift. That is just such a gift to be able to like connect with your body that way and be aware in that way. So that's definitely something. And then I think like we've talked about this a little bit, which we were even talking about before when I was cleaning up, which is like there's like the ego element of like I've always wanted to be a musician who does everything. Like that is such a draw for me, and some of that comes from insecurity of like wanting to feel completely like grounded in the fact that nobody can be critical of me of like, you didn't do this or you don't do this. Like, no, like I want to try everything. And so this is definitely something very unique that feels like, in the pure sense of it, it feels like a very exploratory, open-minded thing. In the more ego-driven sense of it, it feels like a way of protecting myself from like any sort of somebody being like, well, you haven't done this. It's like, well, I've played Philip Glass, like, which is just, it's the silly ego part of my brain, but it's true. And so I've really enjoyed those things about it immensely. It's been very meaningful. And we haven't even played it.
We haven't played it.
We've just been practicing it. So,
because I will say it took a slight bit of courage for me, your partner, to have you, my partner, come into a practice space and begin music with changing parts. And I just saw your face a couple times and you were just like not playing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he hates this. I should never have invited him. What am I doing right now? But you're here for it and you've practiced so much. And so that like, I was definitely scared for a moment of like, what have I done to my relationship?
yeah. Which you felt that way about so many things you've shown me.
True. That's true.
Like
but
old
like,
movies or
milkshakes
in Missoula.
But it's different to like
drink
a
different.
milkshake than play Philip Glass.
Like commit to hours of Philip Glass. Yes, that's very true. But yeah. All right.
But that does speak to just like I just feel very fortunate in this moment to know people who are open to playing this music. And again, open to committing this time. And I don't know what the financial payout is going to be, but it means so much to me that that's not what it's about. It's not about what we make at the end of the day. It's not about how many people are in the audience. It's about we want to play this music and we all are open to putting in the work to do that.
Yeah. To wrap things up, we've been having an ongoing conversation about because there's people we're inviting and people who really want to see us perform who have no experience with minimalism or Philip Glass, and they've been like, should we listen to it before? Should we check it out? And there's been differing opinions. Which, Paula, your opinion has been
No, don't do it.
And why?
I mean, I guess it's just, it's literally just me talking. Like, if I could, I would love to walk into a room where I don't know I don't know what's going to happen. And this is such a surreal thing to happen. So it almost feels like a gift to me to go into this space without knowing what you're about to experience is how I'm looking at it. But that's just me.
What would be your take on that, Jacob? Should you listen or should you not? Or I have a feeling you'll be equivocal.
Yeah, people, you can listen to it. You don't have to listen to it. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I think there's something to be said about the surprise element. If you would like to be surprised, then yes, not listening to it will definitely create a surprise element. But but it's also good to become familiar with it as well, so that you can become more familiar with certain patterns. And I don't know. I think people can do whatever they like, and it'll be fine either way. It's just my take, I guess.
The master of balance, Jacob Adler.
Just do whatever. I don't know. That's my take.
Well, thank you guys very much for sitting down with me and talking about this. Hopefully the people who listen, which I don't imagine there will be many, but I imagine whoever listens to it will find it very enjoyable. So for those of you listening, thank you for listening. Come see the show on December 19th at the Crescent Ballroom, the Openscore Ensemble playing some Philip Glass.
Yeah. Thanks for the conversation.